Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from TerranceDamien called Stories from My Notebook. You know, sometimes you know what you're getting into, and sometimes it really is a complete crapshoot. You might have some good feelings about it, but who knows what's coming when you get a record from a previously unknown artist who says that he's been following you since you started your channel about 3.5 years ago, just waiting for the perfect opportunity to come in. Yep, folks, this is another act who managed to get his album up on my schedule on Patreon. TerranceDamien, an MC for whom I can't really seem to find a lot of information, but recently seems to have picked up traction thanks to a few freestyles that he compiled into a mixtape late last year, and now with this album of 10 songs. And honestly, it's kind of rare when I go into a project and I have literally no idea what to expect in terms of production, or sound, or rapping ability, or pretty much anything. I saw that there was a label associated with this guy, but I couldn't find any other official website or anything else dropped under it. So this looks to be more of a homebrew sort of situation, but you know, that's not exactly a bad thing. Purely independent hip-hop projects can be something special if the production and bars are on point. Look at Chance the Rapper or Macklemore. So you know what, I went into this with clear eyes and fair expectation. So what'd I find here? Okay, this was an interesting case, and one that I want to give a little bit more consideration than you would typically expect for this sort of underground, startup, indie rapper. Most because I actually see real potential here. Let me stress that I don't really think that TerranceDamien's Stories from My Notebook is great or even entirely good, but it is certainly more interesting than I expected, and instead of my usual critical vivisection, I'm going to take this time to explain where he can really improve going forward, with this project being more of a case study, because I get the feeling that he probably will end up watching this and who knows what might come out of that. Again, there is some real potential here, and it did manage to hold my interest, which is saying something. Perhaps not for all the best reasons, but okay, we'll get to that in detail. So let's start off with TerranceDamien as a rapper. And I'll say it, there is something to like about this guy. His flows are pretty diverse, he's got a decent sense of comic timing, and while there are your fair share of dropped or flubbed rhymes, he's got an annoying habit of rhyming words that come from the same root or just rhyming words themselves. But overall, you know, he's got a solid foundation when it comes to a lot of his bars. Many of his verses play to a very laid-back, very conversational style, almost to the point where you can trace his direct influences. And when I say that, I mean that there are flows and cadences and even outright lyrical interpolations that would concern a fair few lawyers if they had actually heard them, like that little Usher bit on My Little Secret. Now this is where my first major comment is. Look, I appreciate you doing your own interpretation of Tupac's Me and My Girlfriend, but not only did Jay-Z and Beyonce already do this over a decade ago, but it's the sort of thing that doesn't exactly help you stand out, especially if all you're doing is taking it in a bloodier direction. And this leads to the very, very pronounced Eminem influence. More so than even maybe Hopsin, you can tell that TerranceDamien has pulled a lot of his flows and even overarching subject matter from early Eminem albums, which would be fine if TerranceDamien was as expressive or hard-hitting of an MC as M was. Sad thing, he's really not. The delivery often plays to low-key, witty, slacker bro style, and that doesn't really consistently bring a lot of intensity or energy that he might otherwise need, which doesn't help his rapping and can really hurt the moments where he half tries to sing. It doesn't turn out well. Now this leads to my second point for him. I have a hard time gauging how you want to define yourself as an MC. Moody, introspective storyteller like on Boy Interrupted or Story 261, half-joking psycho like on Bjork's Stalker song, Me and My Girlfriend, or Between the Lines on the WeakDay remix, or playing to the young everyman on songs like the school reminiscence of Remember That, or the hookup on I Like You, or the cheating on both sides of My Little Secret. Now as it is, without a firm delineation of style, it can lead to some moments of real tonal dissonance, or at the very least some questionable framing, especially on songs like the WeakDay remix, where the violent references, they just feel completely out of place for that sort of song and vibe, especially given the melody. Now this is where I do want to give TerranceDamien some credit, because he is not a bad storyteller in terms of filling his songs with texture and detail in the writing. The hookup remembrances on I Like You are pretty well grounded and realistic, fantastic. The school stories will remember that very much the same way, and especially the extended rape revenge tale of Story 261 that closes the album. The sort of grisly story that includes a bathroom abortion, and yet through its presentation manages to be both empathetic and kind of horrifying, and how frequent said stories might be. They're on 261 after all. But on the flip side, when you replace that sort of story opposite the cheap denial of sex sitcom humor of Sex Game, which might be relatable but really isn't all that funny, or the laundry list of obvious tropes on Millennial Girl, it can make for a jarring contrast, especially when you consider how much darker the back half of this album is compared to the first half. What it doesn't show is a lot of coherence and focus in the writing overall. I don't mind the humor or the detail, which is probably the fastest path to internet notoriety in comparison with the more serious and intense subject matter, but it'll be drawing it all together to make more of an overall point that will help the song and indeed the album stand out. And now on to the production and instrumentation, where I'll wholeheartedly admit this album really caught me by surprise in a mostly good way. If you're going in expecting anything close to modern trap snares or percussion, you're definitely going to leave disappointed. If anything, more of the synth tones that we get sound like they were imported here from the beginnings of the buzzy club era circa 2008 to maybe 2010, 2011, with overall brighter tones and more basic, blocky percussion. And this can be both good and bad. On the one hand, songs like I Like You and Millennial Girl make heavy use of a pretty thick bass melody to play off the brighter keys to bring in some solid groove, and you have the sparse, melancholic guitar tones on Boy Interrupted, Bjork's Stalker Song, and Stories 261 that are pretty damn solid and really setting the mood, and the hooks here, pretty solidly melodic. These will be tracks and hooks that will stick in your brain, whether you want them to or not, which I will say this, it's kind of impressive considering how stripped back a lot of the production is. But that also leads to two issues, the first being in a lot of the percussion. The beats we do get are nearly always feel closer to the front of the mix than the actual melodies, and not particularly well blended with them. I feel I could break apart these instrumentals piece by piece into chunks. Good chunks, mind you, but they could be fused together slightly better into forms of a more cohesive piece. And this leads to my second point. Given the lack of a greater organic depth in these mixes, many of these instrumentals have a very home-built and almost intimate feel in their tone, and yet they lack a certain amount of texture or grit that comes with them, which, yes, can work for the more chipper, upbeat songs and even complement some of the melodies, but it also leads to some of the more Eminem comparisons feeling all the more stark, and it can also lead to some of the atmosphere not quite being as convincing or solid as it could have been given the content or some of the melody. But you know what, in short, I'll say it again, there's potential here. TerranceDamien, he represents a lane that's been really underserved in a lot of mainstream rap, and that is the guy who's willing to tell more detailed stories and actually set more of a scene instead of just rattling off streams of bragging with disconnected punchlines and a triplet flow. Now, granted, where I think this project could be improved is defining more of that personality behind the stories for a little bit more consistency in the framing, maybe add it up to a little bit more, maybe blend the instrumentals and bars together with a little bit more unique texture so that the influences aren't quite as blatantly obvious. But you know what? This is a promising start. So while I'm giving it a 5 out of 10, it's a strong 5 out of 10 and a recommendation you check this out. It's always a bit of a crapshoot when you're talking about indie rappers getting big, but you know what? There is something about TerranceDamien here, and I wouldn't count him out. There's promise. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I got the link down there into the description below if you want to buy the album, and if you guys ever happen to hear it, the poll up there is telling you what you guys would otherwise rate a project like this. I'm always a little bit curious how you guys evaluate these sort of indie projects, especially in this vein. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get more involved in my scheduling process, or maybe if you're an indie rapper who wants to land on my schedule, the link to my Patreon is right there. For the lower level contributions, a couple times a week you guys get to vote, and for the higher level ones, you also get to vote, but once a week on Saturdays, you guys get to add records to my schedule, or even movies. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time. Maybe hire a private investigator just to find you. Nights like this, I don't wanna chit